Under the darkening 13th century skies, the ground shook with thundering hooves. More than nomads, the Mongols were a living storm, relentlessly sweeping from east to west. In the dim torchlight of European castles, accounts of their conquests, from China's ruins to Persia's ashes, cast chilling shadows. Church bells weren't for prayer, but for a cry of impending doom, foreshadowing mothers' wails and armies clashing. Europe remained unaware, gazing into history's coming tempest, a storm echoing Genghis Khan's voice. Join me as we step into the 13th century's early murmurs, a time when Europe existed in isolation, happily ignorant of the storm beyond its borders. Whispers reached them of horsemen fast as wind, vanishing as quickly, a force of legend and power. These were the Mongols, not simple wanderers, but bringers of change, led by the formidable Genghis Khan. During this period, Europe was busy with its endless disputes and the church's growing influence. Paying little heed to the power gathering in the east, Genghis Khan, initially named Temujin, was shaped by hardship. Surviving betrayal and difficulty forged him into a leader of iron determination, uniting scattered Mongolian tribes and paving the way for an empire. The Mongols relied not only on raw power, they excelled in speed and psychological tactics with terrifying military efficiency. By the end of Genghis Khan's reign, vast areas, from China to Persia, showed the mark of his strategies, his skill in adaptation, and his unwavering drive. These conquerors were unique invaders, visionaries who built an intricate network for communication and supply. The Silk Road thrived under their control, encouraging a tumultuous yet rich blend of cultures and new ideas. Their system of relay posts and military tactics left larger, more established armies bewildered as tales of their eerie abilities spread across the known world. While Europe rested in its medieval days, the Mongols looked west, ready to overturn everything. On the Mongolian steppes, where the sky felt more boundless than dreams, a warrior society flourished. Life there was a constant struggle against fierce winds and harsh winters, strengthening the Mongols daily. The horse was vital, more than just transport. It was a trusted partner, enhancing their flexible strategy. This connection enabled them to master mounted warfare, outmaneuvering adversaries in a synchronized dance with the land that shaped them. As rumors of their aims grew, Mongol scouts quietly penetrated Europe, seeming like a small stream, but in reality, a powerful flood. Their sharp eyes observed every crossing, alternative route, and vulnerable settlement. Yet Europe stayed caught up in its confident beliefs and diplomatic distractions, overlooking hints of a coming storm. Europe's narrow focus, destined to remain embroiled in its own conflicts, allowed the Mongols' advance to go unnoticed. For a continent used to battling self-made visible threats, the Mongols were just a far-off story. To the populace, they were no more real than dragons or distant legends. This unawareness, a mix of self-satisfaction and arrogance, concealed Europe's true vulnerability. Even the rumors from merchants were dismissed as wild tales, not serious warnings. Ignoring the Mongol threat served as a soothing comfort to a generally unstable society, deeply entrenched in rituals, beliefs, and the struggle to survive. But everything changed when Mongol riders crossed borders not to test, but to fundamentally change and conquer. Equipped with precise intelligence, they represented a force unrestrained by the boundaries Europe considered permanent. These mounted warriors moved with astonishing speed, making slow-moving European defenses obsolete. The existing world order wavered as the Mongols seized the advantage, exploiting foolish isolation with skillful cleverness and employing war methods as fluid and unpredictable as the steppe winds. Looking back at this historical period, Genghis Khan's impact is undeniable. His legacy is not just conquest, but a shift in how things were perceived. His reforms and strategies emphasized a desire for connected societies, combining brutality with a strategic rule that was more than just taking over. By 1235, that legacy continued, pushing the Mongols further into Europe, driven by purpose and a consistent, inherited vision that stood in contrast to Europe's isolated thinking. When the Mongols finally advanced, they moved like whispers, a mystery embodied in confidence and momentum. With every relentless mile, they demonstrated their skill in an unsettling harmony, challenging European ideas about military strategy and typical orderly existence. This invasion was more than just a clash of weapons. It was a radical change in ideas about boundaries, a fundamental rethinking of medieval understanding. The Mongols took advantage of every weakness the continent presented, an unstoppable force that highlighted the old order's decline against their own unstoppable rise. Thus begins our story of the Mongol advance, the narrative of a tempest that Europe ignored until it could no longer be denied. As the medieval world evolved, so too did the pages of an inevitable story that would, through its tension and turmoil, reveal the deep fragility and resilience within civilizations. As the echoes of those riders faded, they left a mark across the ages, and Europe, reshaped in their wake, began to stir. In 1237, as a harsh winter covered the vast lands of Kievan Rus, the earth shook from a storm few could have imagined. Not a natural storm, but one of warriors. Led by Batu Khan, grandson of the mighty Genghis Khan, the Mongols arrived not just as conquerors, but as nature's own force. Their advance, constant and unyielding, found the people of Rus unprepared. Their past experiences with small princely skirmishes were no match for such an attack. To a society used to internal conflicts, the Mongol army was an unimaginable threat, more legend than reality, until their destructive power became evident. Razin faced the brunt of this eastern storm. By December, it was under siege, a sign of what awaited the rest of Rus. Inside its walls, inhabitants clung to fading hope for rescue, their prayers lost in the freezing air. Batu Khan's forces, with chilling precision, surrounded the city, making escape impossible and demanding surrender. When faced with resistance, Ryazan fell, consumed by fire and despair. Writers of the time recorded the horror. Looting, mass killings, and enslavement burned into memory as survivors whispered unbelievable tales of terror. The siege of Vladimir quickly followed, targeting not just a political hub, but the spiritual core of Orthodox Christianity. Within its protected walls were cathedrals and sacred objects, once considered impenetrable, now facing destruction. The Mongols, disregarding religious sanctity, besieged Vladimir in 1238, breaching its defenses with disturbing ease. As the walls collapsed, chaos erupted. The Dormition Cathedral, a symbol of divine protection, became a final refuge for the city's nobles. Yet inside its holy halls, faith offered no protection against Mongol fury. The city's ruin echoed far beyond its borders, a stark example of a divine promise unfulfilled. Kyiv, the pride of Kievan Rus, suffered a similar fate as Batu Khan's forces closed in by 1240. Celebrated for trade, culture, and its grand appearance, Kiev represented the peak of Rus' civilization. However, its magnificence provided no defense against the Mongol tide, the masters of siege warfare. The Mongols surrounded Kyiv with devastating accuracy, using a strategy of starvation and hardship. The resulting massacre led to a cultural wiping out as complete as any military victory. Famous structures were reduced to ashes. The city's splendor vanished under a sea of blood and fire. Beneath the overwhelming force of Mongol ferocity lay the political weaknesses of Rus, a land divided, existing more as scattered, rival principalities than a single entity. This division greatly benefited the Mongols. Batu Khan, skilled in manipulating divisions, exploited these rifts, creating distrust among the princes, whose alliances crumbled as systematically as their cities. Those who resisted alone quickly realized the futility of isolated defiance. Throughout this campaign, the Mongols employed a scorched earth tactic that left the land desolate and barren. They turned the landscape into a barren reminder of their presence. Farms were left uncultivated, villages burned, and survivors scattered, sowing a psychological defeat within a military conquest. Chroniclers struggled to capture the scale of the destruction. Their words later echoed through history, a chilling account of a civilization undone. Among the ruins were the displaced people of Kievan Rus. As smoke rose from cities like Ryazan, Vladimir, and Kyiv, refugees fled, disappearing into forests or traveling the steppes seeking safety. They were merchants, artisans, and scholars, made homeless by the destruction. With little but their memories, their flight carried tales of annihilation and resilience. These stories became part of the collective memory of Rus, forming the foundation of a cultural identity rediscovered amidst despair. Yet while the people of Rus grappled with a legacy of loss, the West watched with peculiar indifference. Separated by distance and poor communication, Western kingdoms often dismiss stories of Tatar brutality as exotic fables. Focused on their own affairs, many European powers underestimated the chance of a direct threat to their lands, a complacency that would later haunt them. In the world before the Mongol arrival, life was shaped by professions and customs, now alien to modern thought. Guardians of home and hearth, merchants and artisans, involved in steady trade along the Dnieper, found themselves adrift in a changed landscape. Traditional roles collapsed, and the Mongol rule tore apart the woven social structure, preparing Rus for a future requiring rebuilding from deep loss. The fall of Kievan Rus serves as a reminder of resilience trapped by fear. The Mongol threat exposed weaknesses but also sparked defiance, creating stories of courage amidst despair. These tales form the basis for Europe's future preparations, embedding lessons of unity and vulnerability. From the ruins, a story of endurance emerged, a testament to humanity's ability to rebuild, even after an overwhelming challenge. The storm of Batu Khan passed, but the memory of its destruction lingered, warning future generations about the eternal interplay of fate and strength. In the early spring of 1241, Europe was a collection of fragmented kingdoms, each absorbed in its own disputes and goals, unaware of the approaching storm. The Mongols, fast and unyielding, arrived like a dark force on the horizon. Poland, in particular, was a collection of duchies, loosely connected by weak alliances and local allegiances. Life was difficult, marked by the daily labor of medieval existence across rugged land, divided by thick forests and sparse populations. In this fractured region, news traveled more by rumor than reliable methods, whispering tales of an unstoppable Mongol horde advancing with ominous certainty. Westward drifted rumors of destruction from the devastated lands of Rus, casting a shadow of fear over Poland. Batu Khan's forces, like a relentless tide, forced the dukes to gather their troops in a desperate rush. Knights, peasants, anyone who could hold a weapon stood ready, a mix of warriors with nobles in shining chainmail, alongside villagers armed with little more than farm tools. The air was heavy with tension and the sound of armor as hesitant forces moved towards Legnica, unknowing participants in fate's brutal plan. Driven by a mix of pride and stories, these soldiers knew bravery, but saw their enemy only as horrifying tales, half-imagined figures from far-off lands. Facing them were the Mongols, masters of deception and speed, not just remnants of steppe fighters, but a sophisticated force honed by battles across Eurasia. Riding agile, strong horses, they were trained from youth as archers and riders, forming a flexible, adaptable war machine. To Europeans used to clumsy ranks of knights, the Mongols seemed almost supernatural in their quickness. Using spies and misinformation, the Mongols created confusion among their enemies, a masterful display of psychological manipulation. Hidden from Polish commanders, the Mongols created an elaborate strategy of division and exhaustion. Their horsemen created illusions of a massive army, driving terror deep into enemy ranks. Through fake retreats, they lured knights into traps, the sound of hooves signaling doom. Every arrow and rider in their army contributed to a symphony of chaos, dismantling Polish ranks with frightful precision. It was a display of warfare unlike anything Europe had seen, each action leaving deep scars on its medieval psyche. As the sun rose over Legnica, the battlefield was tense with the anticipation of two vastly different worlds on the verge of collision. European coalition forces stood firm, an assembly of proud knights in colorful banners, flanked by soldiers with pikes and swords, Templars holding up symbols of faith. Across the field, Mongol warriors studied their opponents, evaluating the weaknesses and strengths visible on each shield and helmet. This was more than a battle. It was a brutal test of contrasting cultures and fighting styles. The Mongols unleashed a dark cloud of arrows, which rained down on the knights, whose armor offered little protection against such accurate volleys. The Templars and experienced soldiers were drawn from their positions into dangerous traps by the Mongol deception. Their tactical skill cleverly outmaneuvered the European forces, extracting a heavy price in blood. Each move was executed with near-theatrical skill. The Mongols transformed the battlefield into a deadly puzzle, surpassing the expectations of tangible European warfare, unaware of their clever tactics. The weapons at Legnica were not just tools, but represented broader cultural conflicts. Polish knights, the embodiment of European martial nobility, used long lances for charges and swords for close combat. Their armor was impressive but heavy, suited for traditions that limited their agility. In contrast, the Mongols used light composite bows, designed for quick firing, easily able to penetrate armor. Their arrows had various deadly effects. Their sabers were quick and precise, ideal for cavalry clashes. Smoke bombs and skull pyramids were used as psychological weapons, crushing European resolve. This arsenal was more than just equipment. It was evidence of strategic boundaries and different understandings of the art of warfare. When the battle ended, a grim scene unfolded. The fields of Legnica presented haunting sights and sounds. Once filled with the roar of conflict, they were now silent, except for the cries of wounded souls. Amidst tarnished armor that had shone just hours before, the victorious Mongols built gruesome monuments from the severed heads of fallen knights. This horrifying aftermath stood as a chilling reminder of their victory, a dark warning to anyone who might challenge them. The survivors scattered, carrying stories of an enemy as terrifying to the mind as they were on the battlefield. The battle's impact lingered long after weapons were put away, becoming a vivid lesson of Mongol might, a call for unity amidst Europe's disorder. Legnica was not just a battle, but a revelation, showing how underestimated forces could bring about disaster. The Mongols ignited Europe's imagination, Tartars creating nightmares in chronicles and songs. Yet those humbled by defeat began to envision new possibilities, developing defenses, statehood, and alliances, quietly healing wounds and refining strategy under the shared shadow cast by Mongol intentions. Each echo from Legnica's field expanded into a larger story of fear, respect, adaptation, and growing European cooperation that would spread like the distorted sound of hooves through the ages. In the early months of 1241, Hungary was a volatile mix of ethnic tensions and political instability. Lying vulnerable in the path of the Mongol advance, King Bela IV was acutely aware of the coming storm, desperately trying to build a unified defense from a diverse kingdom inhabited by Hungarians, Germans, Slavs, and Cumans, nomadic refugees fleeing the Mongols themselves. While their arrival brought both advantages and conflict, Bela's pleas for Western help were largely ignored as the Mongol tide, led by Subutai and Batu Khan, approached. Hungary was on the verge of collapse, overwhelmed by internal divisions and the creeping dread of Eastern destruction. The Mongols, experts in strategy and psychological warfare, knew well how fractured Hungary was. With an extensive intelligence network that understood the pulse of Europe, Hungary was not just a geographical target, but a stepping stone to more conquests. Its rich lands, strategic locations, and wealth presented an incredibly tempting prize. By creating confusion and fear through scout raids and tactical feints, the Mongols undermined any hope of a unified Hungarian resistance. On the eve of the Battle of Mohi, a heavy cloud of dread hung over the land as Hungary braced itself for a brutal confrontation with one of history's most feared armies. As night fell on April 10, 1241, the Battle of Mohi began under an eerily glowing moon. The Hungarian forces gathered near the Sajo River faced a formidable enemy. With Subutai's cunning tactics leading the way, the Mongols executed a feigned retreat, luring part of the Hungarian army into a deadly trap. As battle cries mingled with the sound of steel and the ominous twang of Mongol bows, chaos erupted across the fields. Fast and agile, the Mongol cavalry unleashed waves of arrows upon the unsuspecting Hungarians. With daylight, the full extent of the devastation was revealed. Having skillfully placed a hidden bridge upstream, the Mongols executed a pincer movement across the Sajo River, trapping the Hungarians in a web of carefully planned strategy. Panic spread, and even King Bela IV's attempts to rally his troops were useless. The field transformed from an organized defense into a desperate struggle for survival. By the end of the battle, the ground was covered with the fallen, marking another victory for Mongol military skill. The aftermath carried a haunting significance. Hungary lay in ruins, its society shattered, with towns and villages engulfed in flames. Survivors faced the grim reality of looting and starvation. Communities were scattered, their social structure torn apart. King Bela IV narrowly escaped, finding refuge in Austria as his country burned. Hungary's collapse sent shockwaves throughout Europe, creating a wave of panic and a ripple effect of fear across the continent. It was a wake-up call that exposed weaknesses in the feudal system. Amidst the devastation, religion and superstition became both a refuge and a way to understand events. Many saw the Mongols as agents of divine anger, fulfilling prophecies of doom. Chroniclers described their invasion as a cosmic battle between good and evil, embedding superstitions deep within the narrative of their incursions. The Mongols, mysterious due to unfamiliar customs and seen as barbaric, became symbols of terrifying, unknown forces. Religious centers offered sanctuary, but even holy places were not spared, challenging faith and resilience. The invasion's impact was indiscriminate, affecting both nobility and commoners. For the aristocracy, defeat meant upheaval, turning commanders into refugees. King Belethor's own flight symbolized their struggle, navigating complex loyalties and promises as they fought for survival and recovery. Meanwhile, peasants bore the brunt of the invasion, enduring violence, famine, and displacement. Yet amidst suffering, resilience emerged. Communities formed new bonds, adapting and rebuilding with determination. A massive refugee crisis followed, with waves of displaced Hungarians crossing into neighboring lands. Bela IV led this exodus, seeking asylum, which strained resources and caused conflicts over territory. This crisis highlighted Europe's interconnectedness, with cultural interactions leading to exchanges and occasionally tension. Despite current hardships, these blending cultures would influence regions, fostering a mosaic of evolving identities. The Mongol invasion's impact was far-reaching, shaping Hungary's future significantly. Belethor's later reforms strengthened the kingdom with land grants and new alliances, reinforcing central authority. The Mongols exposed the limitations of fragmented feudal systems, prompting strategic changes that reshaped power structures. Ethnic groups within Hungary were drawn closer, paving the way for a unified national identity. The European perspective was a mix of panic and opportunity. Fear of the Mongol threat spurred defensive preparations, but also led to diplomatic and economic engagement with the new vast empire. As panic subsided, trade networks connecting East and West emerged, and cultural exchanges laid the groundwork for future Renaissance growth. While the threat of Mongol invasion cast a long shadow, it also revealed new paths to interconnectedness. From the ruins of Mohi, lessons on unity, adaptability, and resilience were learned. The need for collective defense and unified leadership became clear, and Hungary's experiences informed Europe's wider political landscape. By surviving one of its darkest periods, Hungary and indeed Europe planted seeds of renewal, innovation, and stronger survival strategies that would shape their historical path. In the early months of 1241, an unsettling silence hung over Europe, a deceptive calm before the Mongol storm. Stories of destruction from the east filtered in, but many European elites held on to disbelief, dismissing the Mongols as merely a distant noise. However, those near Europe's edges, like the citizens of Vienna, began to feel the terrifying whisper turn into alarmed discussions. The psychological terror created by tales from Hungary and Poland turned skepticism into a growing awareness of the looming threat. As Hungarian refugees arrived with grim stories, the cities at Europe's edge realized they had to prepare for a force that completely changed warfare. Vienna, perched precariously on the brink of annihilation, wrestled with strategies to strengthen its defenses. The city's rhythm transformed, churches echoed with prayers, and markets buzzed with fearful speculation. The Danube, vital for trade, now seemed a fragile barrier against the approaching doom. Viennese leaders understood that uniting the city was about more than military strength. It was about preparing hearts and minds. Meetings that once planned celebrations now organized watch schedules, while citizens scrutinized every sound and shadow. Yet through this tension, resilience emerged. Farmers, artisans, and monks worked tirelessly to support the city's defense. As Europe braced for impact, its armies wondered how to withstand the Mongols. European warfare, with its armored knights and rigid formations, faced the fluidity and speed of the Mongol approach. The Mongols' adaptability and psychological tactics made traditional European methods cumbersome. European leaders scrambled to adapt, recognizing the importance of gathering intelligence and using unconventional strategies. However, institutional inertia hindered them, highlighting a cultural clash between knightly bravery and the Mongols' relentless practicality. Filled with misunderstandings, Europe misconstrued Mongol culture, often viewing it simply as barbarism. Medieval Europeans and Mongols were separated by a vast gap of fear and misinformation, where rumors fueled prejudice. Brave explorers and envoys who returned with more nuanced accounts faced suspicion and hostility. While some tried to bridge the cultural divide, many Europeans were unsettled by the sheer difference in the Mongol approach. As Vienna prepared for confrontation, understanding the human aspect behind the cavalry might have opened possibilities for negotiation. Vienna responded creatively to the Mongol threat by strengthening its defenses. Citizens worked together, building barricades and reinforcing walls, realizing their survival depended on collective effort. Markets continued, and community rituals persisted amidst growing anxiety. Knights adapted drills from Eastern techniques, while peasants prepared for a siege, focusing on securing food and supplies. The unity needed to face the Mongols highlighted Vienna's determination. Victory meant standing together against an apparently unstoppable force. Religion also became a source of defense, with clergy framing the conflict as both spiritual and physical. Churches became centers of hope and resolve, joining forces with military leaders. Sermons were filled with passion, rallying citizens under a divine banner. This blend of piety and practicality fortified Vienna, nurturing a spirit of resilience during challenging times. Reconnaissance missions played a crucial role as Mongols advanced toward Vienna. Scouts and spies ventured into enemy territory, bringing back vital intelligence. This information transformed Vienna's preparation from passive defense to proactive strategy. The roles of these unsung heroes were crucial, balancing information gathering with the risk of detection. Against this backdrop, Vienna spurred Europe towards unprecedented unity. Faced with a threat that knew no borders, rivalries were set aside in favor of shared defense. Diplomatic efforts forged new alliances, binding the continent in a network of survival. While this unity was born of fear and necessity, it left a legacy of collaborative resilience within Europe's identity. Amid these tensions, refugees fleeing the Mongols streamed westward, bringing with them stories of devastation, but also rich cultural diversity. Vienna welcomed these newcomers, integrating their skills and traditions into the city's fabric. This exchange fostered empathy and mutual enrichment, turning potential cultural conflicts into collaboration. The influence of this migration outlasted the Mongol threat, a testament to the enduring power of human connection. Meanwhile, Europe's fate shifted with the death of Great Khan Ögedei. His passing resonated throughout the Mongol Empire, calling its leaders back to Mongolia. This unexpected turn offered a reprieve for Vienna and all of Europe, a reminder of how distant events can dramatically change history's course. It was neither knightly bravery nor Mongol remorse that saved the city, but the unwavering customs of an empire. This revelation provides insight into how larger narratives intersect with personal ones, showing how structured ceremonies granted a brief, precious pause to Vienna, allowing us to consider what might have happened had fate woven a different path. Ögedei Khan's sudden death in December 1241 sent shockwaves through the Mongol Empire, prompting the ancient tradition of a Kurultai, a grand council convened to elect a new Great Khan. This system was more than just a political ritual, it was the foundation of Mongol culture, reflecting the values established by Genghis Khan himself. For Batu Khan, positioned at the edge of Europe, with his armies ready to conquer the continent, the call to return was irresistible. It was the ultimate demonstration of the Mongols' commitment to tradition over ambition, a contrasting detail to their otherwise relentless conquests. For the Mongols, death was not just an ending, it was a time for reaffirming communal bonds through ceremony. The death of a great Khan required a reassessment of priorities and initiated a halt in military activities. Leaders were drawn back to Mongolia, compelled by a sense of duty to participate in the selection of their next leader. Ögedei's passing was not just an emotional moment, but a political turning point, highlighting an empire where rapid military expansion coexisted with the slower, steady rhythms of political life. The Kurultai emphasized this duality, where even the momentum of an army on the verge of conquering Europe could be stopped by the solemnity of governance rituals, illustrating a profound irony where death rescued a continent facing doom. This pause in Mongol advancement wasn't just a strategic halt, but insight into the complex ceremonial nature of Mongol hierarchy. It demonstrated their unwavering loyalty to the traditions that served as the empire's moral compass. Batu Khan, despite standing at the threshold of an unprecedented conquest, was bound by an unchangeable destiny: to abandon his European ambitions in favor of obligations rooted in Mongol identity. The Kurultai was not just about choosing a leader, it was about allegiance to the cultural cornerstones of Mongol rule, which combined ruthless military power with unyielding cultural tradition. For Europe, the sudden stop to Mongol aggression was nothing short of miraculous. With a continent battered by successive defeats, the abrupt halt seemed to many like divine intervention, a fate guided less by military strength and more by distant customs unknown to them. This unexpected reprieve allowed territories to heal, reorganize, and importantly rediscover a flicker of hope against an invincible enemy. The pause transformed Europe's psychological landscape, shifting from fear of inevitable domination to a fragile recovery. With precious time gained from this pause, leaders reinforced defenses, reevaluated strategies, and rekindled spirits previously crushed under the weight of defeat. This ripple effect spread across Europe, affecting socio-political dynamics as well as military strategies. Leaders with newfound breathing room could renegotiate alliances and strengthen their positions, both domestically and internationally. It spurred innovations in military strategies and fortifications, inspiring renewed optimism. The idea of Mongol invincibility, suddenly suspended by a seemingly bureaucratic tradition, shifted perceptions, changing fears of an unstoppable force into narratives of an empire closely tied to its own traditions. As leaders grasped this twist of fate, the contemplation of mortality intertwined with power became significant. Even amidst grand ambitions to expand their territory, Mongol leaders recognized the fragility of their power structures. For Europe, this led to reflections on survival and fate, giving rise to narratives beyond mere survival, prompting philosophical musings about existence and deeper understandings within medieval thought. This intersection initiated a cultural clash that sparked curiosity about these compelling traditions, capable of pausing an empire's advance. Astute European minds sought to understand Mongol customs out of necessity and as an opportunity for cross-cultural exchange. Europe's desire for knowledge about Mongol traditions opened avenues for mutual understanding, though marked by misconceptions. Written records and oral histories began to weave a fabric of narratives that offered richer perspectives of both civilizations. What was once seen as a monolithic barbarism became an intricate tapestry of human expression. This intellectual curiosity went beyond mere strategic interest, revitalizing monastic records and diplomatic exchanges and broadening intellectual horizons beyond the immediate narrative of survival. The Kurultai's legacy was more than an internal Mongol matter. It was a pivotal point in European history, a fate-determined pause immortalized in medieval chronicles. The Kurultai provided material for narratives of divine interventions and unique Mongol customs for Europe. It was the cosmic intervention that allowed time to regain composure and reevaluate their place within the medieval world. The continent regrouped, redirecting energies into cultural and political renaissances, reflecting their survival, avoiding what could have been another dark chapter in history orchestrated by Mongol might. Even as Europe breathed a sigh of relief, the specter of uncertainty lingered. The myth of Mongol invincibility persisted, instilling fear and respect in equal measure across generations. Tales of their prowess bordered on myth and legend, portraying Mongols as enigmatic forces miraculously diverted, but never entirely defeated. This undercurrent of fear continued, prompting advancements in military technologies and alliances, precautions against potential future incursions. The enduring myth etched into the fabric of European narrative, balancing social progress with perpetual vigilance. Reflecting on this complex interplay of chaos, survival, and tradition, Europe survived due to an unexpected turn of fate, linked to an empire's respect for its own customs. As surviving entities rebuilt from ashes, they emerged cautiously, yet driven by new perspectives. The pause in conquest initiated by Mongol tradition highlighted that necessary changes went beyond military ones. They were demands to strengthen foundations, a true narrative shift, influencing Europe's resilience for centuries. Relieved, though still cautious, the medieval world carried the weight of uncertainty, attending to the rhythms of survival woven into the sweeping narratives of historical longevity. Thank you for exploring this tale of mysterious times. Stay curious, and we will meet again to delve into history's dark corners. Imagine a different scenario where the Mongols, emboldened by their victories in Poland and Hungary, turned their attention to Vienna. This city, with its strong fortifications, would face a siege not just against stone walls but against the very limits of medieval warfare. The Mongols, with their deadly mix of cunning and cruelty, were skilled in the siege tactics learned from encounters with Chinese fortresses. Their ability to launch flaming projectiles and undermine defenders' morale with psychological warfare could have made even Vienna's most robust defenses seem like mere whispers in the wind. The siege's impact on Vienna could have been devastating. Picture a city, now a cultural landmark, as a ghostly ruin. Supplies would dwindle, fear would grow, and the specter of Mongol savagery would cast a suffocating haze over its inhabitants. If Vienna fell, it might have opened Europe's heart, inviting a Mongol storm to ravage the continent of its monuments and its history. Beyond Vienna, the Mongols might have looked towards France, a land of fertile fields and cultural richness. The Mongols were driven not by a love of art, but by military advantage. Their intelligence and swift cavalry could have shattered the bonds between France's armored knights and chivalric codes. With arrows whistling through the air, the Mongol horsemen could have outmaneuvered the slow-moving European forces, sweeping through the French countryside with skillful brutality. A Mongol march across France could fundamentally change the course of history. Knights with their heavy armor and storied traditions might find themselves defeated by a force they could neither outrun nor outfight. Paris itself, a shining example of medieval civilization, could have faced an unstoppable siege, its fate hanging precariously. The destruction or looting of Europe's cultural centers might have propelled European arts and learning into an era defined by loss and reinvention. Yet in the shadows of this threat, unity might emerge from despair. The shock waves of Mongol victories could awaken Europe's dormant powers to unite, an alliance formed out of necessity rather than affection. Once hostile nobles might set aside their feuds, driven by a shared fear. The papacy, often involved in spiritual crusades, might redirect its call to arms, urging Europe to unite not against the Islamic East, but against the terrifying horsemen from beyond the steppes. In this crucible of crisis, Europe's military tactics could undergo a profound transformation. The focus could shift from knightly bravery to cohesive infantry-based resistance. By sharing knowledge and strategies, Europe might rapidly develop new defensive technologies or tactics, perhaps even perfecting architectural defenses designed to withstand the Mongol assault. Although initial successes might elude them, Europe's newfound unity could present the Mongols with a formidable challenge. However, even the mighty Mongols were limited by their logistics. Their power depended on maintaining closely linked supply lines that allowed them to sustain their astonishing speed. Pushing deep into Europe would create logistical difficulties that even Mongol ingenuity might struggle to overcome. The vast distances and complex web of European alliances could slow their momentum, while Europe's densely cultivated landscapes offered less sustenance for their armies. As they ventured further, the risk of overextension loomed. Each step away from their supply hubs brought the Mongols closer to the brink of unsustainable conquest. Local alliances were vital but hard to forge in a Europe unaccustomed to pledging loyalty to distant Khans. These logistical strains could serve as the ultimate defense against what seemed like an unstoppable tide from the east. The Mongols' terrifying advance into Europe would have created a deep divide of cultural clashes. Medieval Europe, deeply rooted in feudalism and religious guidance, would stand in stark contrast to the Mongols' meritocratic and practical ways. These differences might have planted the seeds of significant social change across the continent. Europe's rigid class structures could be challenged by a new order, potentially more aligned with Mongolian meritocracy. As politics reshaped under the Mongol gaze, the challenge for Europeans would be to balance fierce resistance with shrewd adaptation. Some regions might submit to Mongol rule, while others become centers of rebellion. The resulting shifts could unleash a torrent of realignments that would tear through Europe for centuries. The pressure on Europe's economies based on local agriculture and fragmented trade might transform dramatically under Mongol influence. Their vast networks could spark a dynamic reimagining of European commerce as new trade routes emerged. Urban centers previously limited by regional isolation could flourish into international trading hubs, enriched by goods previously unseen in their markets. However, such economic changes could also bring exploitation. Increased demand for European products might intensify strains on the feudal system, fueling class divisions and resistance to a new economic order. These tensions, though difficult, could ultimately forge a new economic landscape, defined by both prosperity and peril. Through the devastation of conquest, the Mongols would leave lasting marks on Europe's story. The legacies of battles won and lost, tales of courage and collapse, would echo far beyond the dust of the battlefield. Their cultural exchanges might weave new threads into the fabric of European civilization, creating a tapestry of both trauma and triumph. In the aftermath, Europe could stand on the edge of rebirth, compelled to rethink its identity and its place in the world. The spark of adversity might illuminate new paths, fostering resilience and innovation born from struggle. In this speculative vision, a Europe tempered by the challenge of Mongol invasion emerges, a resilient phoenix of nations and ideas rising from the crucible of their trials. Imagine 1242, the Mongols suddenly retreating from Europe's doorstep, leaving behind a continent trembling with the lingering echo of thunderous hooves and a collective sigh of relief. The death of the great Genghis Khan necessitated a return to the heart of Mongolia for matters of succession, a timely disruption that spared Europe, which was teetering on the brink of its own historical upheaval. The air in Western Europe's castles and manors, thick with the smoke of hurried forges and whispered prayers, slowly changed. The sudden disappearance of the Mongols, to some, might have seemed like divine intervention, a reprieve from inevitable doom. European leaders seized the moment, reinforcing defenses, mending the torn fabric of their armies, all while haunted by the specter of an enemy who vanished as quickly as they had arrived. In the eastern steppes, however, things were different. The Mongol force didn't just disappear into the night. Batu Khan, with his formidable golden horde, established a stronghold in the vast lands of Rus, stamping his authority upon them like a craftsman molding clay. This new rule introduced changes that reverberated through the socioeconomic structures, leaving a permanent imprint on the landscape and the lives of its inhabitants. Meanwhile, Western Europe became busy. The clear call for military readiness resounded as stone buttresses were reinforced, armies were restructured, and old alliances were renewed with a wary eye on the horizon. The Mongol Empire, vast and diverse, was not immune to the dangers of overexpansion and internal conflict. The empire, a massive entity composed of disparate lands and cultures, was familiar with the complex web of intrigue and power struggles that could trap even the mightiest. Ogedei's death sent ripples throughout this empire, sparking political tempests that redirected focus inward. Batu Khan, playing the long game, prioritized stability over the risky gamble of European conquest. The internal complexities of Mongol politics, fraught with rivalries and loyal bonds, became its own kind of battleground. While power struggles brewed within the Mongolian steppes, Europe was occupied with stirring troubled waters. Castles, symbols not only of defense, but of dominion, were built. Thicker walls, clever designs, and siege tactics emerged. Iron resolve forged in the looming shadow of past horrors. The Templars and Hospitallers, armored knights and bearers of the cross, embodied the fusion of religious zeal and military discipline. Their presence was felt not just in sword and shield, but galvanized a burgeoning pan-European identity. Despite the Mongols' temporary presence, their legacy surged like unseen underground rivers, influential despite being hidden. The horde's administration and trade networks intertwined diverse peoples into a mosaic of cultural exchange, like vividly dyed threads in a time-worn tapestry. Trade routes stretched across continents, connecting east and west, showcasing goods and philosophies that ignited the imaginations of European societies. Back in Europe, centralized power began to assert itself. Monarchs, driven by more than survival instinct, embraced the need to streamline governance. France and England laid the groundwork that would eventually see nations wielding the power of bureaucracy and standing armies. Roads became arteries of prosperity, enriching treasuries, While the overall political landscape shifted under the weight of nascent nationalism, a grand puppeteer manipulating the theater of statecraft. Cultural exchanges happened through whispers and written words, travelers bringing back not just silks but fragments of foreign thought. Ideas smuggled like contraband into monasteries and cloaks formed bridges between distant worlds. Gunpowder, foreshadowing future warfare, sparked across battlefields while Mongol strategies refined European military doctrine. As eastern winds blew across European lands, sparks of art, mathematics, and new medicine ignited the minds of its people. The confrontation with the Mongols forced an evolution in Europe's self-perception, creating a unified perspective marked by shared faith and purpose. Under the banners of their Christendom, different cultures found common ground in their fear. Monarchs manipulated this existential dread into political leverage, weaving the narrative of divine right and duty, solidifying their rule amidst the echoes of clashing swords, real or imagined. Lessons were learned, etched by the harsh demands of survival. European strategists adopted lessons in rapid mobility and intelligence gathering from the great Mongol war machine. The Mongol approach to religious tolerance, even if subtle in its legacy, influenced Europe's interactions with diverse cultures. Finally, persistent questions remained. Why did the Mongols never return with full force? Their vast empire stretched like a warrior's bow. The logistics of such a campaign seemed risky. Europe had grown stronger, its defenses more formidable, its warriors more skilled, posing a cost that outweighed potential gains under the shadow of Mongol internal conflict. The Mongol incursion was a pivotal moment that introduced possibility into the soil of Europe, prompting shifts in strategy and identity. Through resilience and resourcefulness in the face of annihilation, Europe crafted its own narrative of survival and transformation. The whispers of Mongol potential faded into history, yet their touch lingered, a reminder of how empires rise and fall, and how narrow the line separating prosperity from oblivion can be. The fear that swept across Europe with the Mongol invasion left a lasting shadow, a persistent dread etched into the very soul of a continent. Like specters on horseback, the stories of the Mongols galloped on, their uncanny strategies and unyielding cruelty becoming the stuff of legend and fear. Chronicles from the time, written with horror and awe, ensured these tales of the horsemen of the apocalypse terrified generations long after their retreat. The Mongols were more than a military threat. They became symbols of chaos, foretelling civilization's potential collapse. In the collective European consciousness, their invasion was stamped as an emblem of vulnerability. This widespread fear trickled into the upbringing of both nobility and commoners. Young minds were shaped by tales of howling stepriders capable of destroying kingdoms within days. Such narratives created a constant anxiety towards the unknown, especially the distant East. As Europe evolved politically and socially, the Mongols' brutality was invoked to instill order and unity against external threats. This fear served as a constant reminder of how close Europe came to cultural extinction, revealing civilization's fragility against the East's military prowess. The portrayal of the Tatars as demons became effective propaganda, casting these warriors as legendary monsters. Chroniclers and clergy grappling with the Mongol threat mixed fact with fiction. Tales of monstrous beings practicing blood rituals emerged, depicting the Mongols as agents of divine punishment or instruments of Satan. They were not just historical adversaries. They symbolized moral and religious conflict. These stories were not simple reflections of events, but were crafted to highlight Europeans' moral and religious anxieties. Storytelling proved a powerful tool for both coping and control. By exaggerating Mongol barbarism, European rulers justified their resistance and centralized power, while the Church emphasized the importance of religious unity. The Mongol narratives permeated sermons and decrees, embedding themselves in societal and moral frameworks. Even if exaggerated, these stories formed a complex tapestry of fear and control. The Mongol invasions left an indelible mark on diplomacy, leaving rulers wary of Eastern incursions. East-West relations fluctuated between trade agreements and political standoffs. In Europe, peace with Mongol territories was uneasy, masked in suspicion and distrust. European leaders, understanding the military power lying beneath a veneer of civilization, remained cautious. Diplomatic exchanges involved blunt practicality and fear. Even when Mongol emissaries reached European courts, they were met with weariness. Yet some statesmen saw alliances with the Mongols as potential leverage against rival Christian states. A blend of fear and opportunity shaped their diplomacy. The Mongol threat also spurred military innovation and fortified Europe. Castles were transformed into imposing fortresses capable of withstanding long sieges. Europe adapted its military strategies, understanding the need to counter the Mongols' speed and coordination. This shift marked a turning point, forcing states to unite, strategize, and share tactics, fostering a form of indirect unification against a common enemy. The Mongol menace influenced not only military and political landscapes, but also pervaded art and literature. Their image appeared in paintings, tapestries, and stories, blending the real with the fantastical, a fusion that underscored resistance against invaders and testing faith against impossible odds. These works entertained and educated, reinforcing order and religious virtue. The art and stories shaped the public memory of Mongol ferocity and invincibility, embedding fear and reverence into the cultural ethos. Psychologically, the Mongol presence instilled a lasting sense of threat. The invasion left not just destruction in its wake, but persistent anxiety, questioning survival and divine protection. This awareness of vulnerability reshaped Europe's identity, fostering paranoia. Fear extended beyond the Mongols, encompassing potential threats from the east and disrupting perceptions of stability, politically, culturally, and spiritually. This fear molded Europe's evolution. Religion interpreted the Mongol incursions as divine tests. Clergy proposed that the Mongols were sent as God's scourge, warning wayward Christian nations, transforming military conquests into theological lessons. Churches used tales of Mongol might, paralleling them with spiritual struggle. The narrative maintained religious authority, reminding followers of faith's power to avert calamity. Beyond royal courts, the Mongols haunted folk traditions and local lore. Oral stories told of phantom riders, creating protective rituals and superstitions. These tales blended existing practices with new fears born of the invasions, preserving cultural identity amidst trauma. Communities found resilience by recounting survival against Mongol onslaught, solidifying them as mythological figures. Historians and scribes, crucial in shaping the Mongol narrative, captured a spectrum of reactions. Their records laid the groundwork for future historical discourse, even as they perpetuated stereotypes. These accounts emphasize lessons of moral laxity and disunity, deepening a narrative that favored European resilience against foreign threats. Reflecting now, the fear inflicted by the Mongols highlights the unforeseen impacts of historical events, transforming simple conquest into profound cultural and psychological phenomena. The dread of Mongol armies influenced military, diplomatic, and cultural changes across Europe. Yet their most enduring legacy was challenging Europe's mindset, prompting innovation and fostering unity. Though scarred, Europe emerged strong, and the Mongol invasion, once a source of anxiety, ultimately reshaped and fortified its historical path. The Mongol invasion of Europe was like a storm silently approaching on the horizon, its threat both distant and devastating. Europe, with its cobblestone streets and grand cathedrals, lived in blissful ignorance of the tempest brewing in the steppes of Asia. The Mongol warriors, rumored to be as swift as the wind and as fierce as demons, were mere myth to those who had not yet felt their fiery breath. Life's ordinary rhythm continued while distant rumors painted a picture of an unstoppable force destined to challenge everything about Europe's reality. These were not just raiders looking to plunder. They were a finely tuned war machine, masters of asymmetric warfare. They entered the steppes with strategies as precise as a dagger's edge, threatening to reshape the world as Europe knew it. As their cavalry thundered towards the heart of Europe, entire cultures stood on the brink, forced to re-examine long-held beliefs about faith and power. The land, so familiar, suddenly felt alien under the shadow of Mongol might. In these critical moments, Europe teetered dangerously close to an abyss, unprepared for a confrontation that could have dramatically altered its fate. Vienna in 1241 represented the last defense. This fortified city, its walls like an intricate tapestry, was all that separated the heart of Europe from a Mongol wave that had already devastated Rus and Hungary. The very air felt charged with an overwhelming sense of foreboding as scouts reported back from the edge of the Adriatic. Behind Vienna lay countless kingdoms, their centers of power buzzing with rumors and fear as dark news from Hungary spread. If Vienna were to fall, Europe's remnants might dissolve into whispers and ashes, its culture and history absorbed by a new era of Mongol dominance. Yet as quickly as the threat appeared, an unexpected turn saw the Mongols retreat. Genghis Khan's death in December 1241 triggered a succession crisis within the Mongol Empire. Following nomadic customs, Batu Khan and other leaders were summoned back to Mongolia, drawn by the call of tradition to elect a new great Khan. In this bizarre twist, the very rituals that unified the Mongols halted their rampage, offering Europe a reprieve delivered by the winds of fortune. The continent found relief not through battle or alliance, but through a cultural obligation unfolding thousands of miles away. Europe had gazed into its potential end and blinked, spared by the fragile thread of mortality intertwined across continents. Europe's sigh of relief did not erase the newfound fear. An unsettling legacy lingered, an encounter with destiny, revealing weaknesses in military and cultural fronts. The continent, which prided itself on its castles, its order, and its faith, found itself humbled by the specter of a Mongol horde. This brush with annihilation sparked a reevaluation. Defenses were strengthened, alliances were rebuilt, and societies began aligning their priorities with the looming specter of the East. As the Mongols retreated, they left behind a legacy that encouraged Europe to innovate, preparing for unseen threats, as if haunted by the echo of hooves and arrows. In the eerie stillness after the retreat, Europe was left contemplating alternate realities. Could the great cities of the West have fallen, becoming hubs of a Mongol empire stretching from Asia's shores to the heart of Europe? Would the very fabric of European society, its religion, its art, its idea of rule, have merged with the steppe's nomadic ethos? The speculative warmth of a campfire tale suggested a world not just saved by chance, but shaped by a close encounter, forever marked by what nearly happened. Rebuilding after the Mongols was about more than just constructing new walls. It was an era of introspection and cultural revival. Towns ravaged by the initial invasion faced not only physical reconstruction, but the emotional and societal healing needed to stitch a fractured identity back together. The urgency of restoration was coupled with a renewed appreciation for civilization's fragility. Communication improved, defenses were strengthened against potential threats, and a narrative of survival thrived among Europe's reborn communities. Yet the shadow of the Mongols stretched far beyond immediate recovery. Chronicles and stories captured the terror and mystery of these fierce invaders. Tales spun from fragments of truth and fear, rippling across generations. In artworks and manuscripts, the Mongol became a symbol of both fear and fascination. Barbarians at the gate, whispering relentless pursuits into the dreams of Europe's children. The fear of hooves on cobblestones worked its way into the veins of European life, an impetus for unity against a foe still firmly entrenched in cultural memory. Genghis Khan's untimely death and the resulting power vacuum served as a catalyst for Europe's miraculous reprieve. The death of a single nomadic ruler rippled across continents, sparing Europe's heartland in an ironic twist of fate. In this chance pause, Europe learned not from the sword but from fortune's whims, building its future on this narrow escape. The Mongol detour remains a poignant reminder of the fine line between existence and oblivion, a legacy etched into European consciousness, serving as both a caution and a catalyst for the centuries that followed.